Planned Parenthood. 2 words, 3 emotional responses. 3. Number 1, rational. You hear the words, you don't care, whatever. Move on with your life. Option 2, pride, a symbol of women's rights. We have control of our bodies and we can go to Planned Parenthood and that's where we have it. Option 3, murderous rage. They're murdering babies. We gotta kill them all. We gotta stop them. We gotta shut it down. That's just one of the topics we'll be covering today. Now, Planned Parenthood is not really important to this video. I just wanted to put it out there because, well, you'll see why. Okay. Planned Parenthood itself. Planned, as in preventing unwanted pregnancies, right? Planned Parenthood, their abortions that they do are not government funded, they're private funded. Your tax dollars are not killing babies, if that's what you believe. I'm not trying to offend anyone here, just want to make that clear. People can actually call their local Planned Parenthood place and donate money and say, I want my $500 to go to aborting black babies or Latino babies. That is true. And if that disturbs you, well, it kind of disturbs me too. But anyway, that's actually the topic of this video. I'll be getting to that. So also, Planned Parenthood is not the only abortion clinic. There are lots of littler ones. That's just the one everybody knows. And abortions are not a new thing. Planned Parenthood did not invent the abortion. Abortions have been going on since antiquity and earlier. There are books about women jumping from high places and landing on things, hoping to shake the fetus from the uterine wall. It's not new. Your mom in high school probably learned that drinking a ton of Mountain Dew and jumping up and down would stop her from getting pregnant. That is not true if you have heard that. Any other soda, not true at all. Don't believe that. I'm just making a point. So, all of that, not true. Now, I'm Alex. If you don't know, this is week 8 on my video. We are going to be talking about eugenics and sterilization. So if you know what that means, you'll understand why I started with Planned Parenthood. The list entries from my women's list this week are 441, 440, 336, 443, 87, and 444. And Margaret Sanger, there you go, number 87, the founder of Planned Parenthood and a pioneer in women's birth control. If you didn't know, she spoke to Vassar College about reducing, quote, the rapid multiplication of the unfit and undesirable, unquote. Yes, it's true. She founded Planned Parenthood to get rid of babies she did not want polluting all of our good selves. You know, she didn't want the half-race baby. She didn't want the deformed baby. She didn't want them. So Planned Parenthood was created so she could get rid of them. The book we're going to be citing this week is called Imbeciles, the Supreme Court, American Eugenics, and the Sterilization of Carrie Buck by Adam Cohen. Only one book. Extensive book. It will be back next week for more. You should really read it if you are intrigued by this topic. And intrigued may not be the right word. Disgusted would be a better word. Now, in 1773, Public Hospital for Persons of Insane and Disordered Mind opens in Williamsburg, Virginia. It is the first U.S. mental hospital. It is older than our nation itself. Which is a little crazy because we're still fighting for mental health issues today, and we have a mental hospital here that's older than our country. It wasn't exactly what you would call a nice place to go to, though. By the year 1887, mental hospitals exist in every part of Virginia. There's plenty throughout the country. And just another note, at this time when all of this I'm talking about, DNA wasn't proven. We didn't know it existed. We didn't know what it was. Therefore, everything was hereditary. So any traits you got from your parents, your grandparents, it was all hereditary. There was no DNA. There was no genetics. Now, the definition of eugenics is this: the science of improving a human population by controlled breeding to increase the occurrence of desirable heritable characteristics. Developed largely by Francis Galton as a method of improving the human race, it fell into disfavor only after the perversion of its doctrines by the Nazis. Just take a moment, just think about it. Only after the Nazis. Only after. Now, let's get into what we're actually talking about here. Progressives popularized the movement. No. It wasn't the racist Republicans. It was the progressives, also known as liberals today. Shocking, I know. It's really launched in the early 20th century, early 1900s. The Catholic Church strongly opposed. There's a joke in there, I know you want to make it. Protestants wanted Catholics to stop reproducing. Catholics obviously wanted to keep reproducing. Big religious war there. I don't know why I'm so thirsty today, guys, sorry. At the time, a Chicago reverend from an Episcopal church stated he will only marry couples with a certificate of health. The feeble-minded, the epileptics, the criminals were the main targets worldwide of the eugenics movement. In 1895, Connecticut passes the first eugenic marriage law in the United States. It will stop feeble-minded or interracial babies from being conceived. That was their hope. So if you're black, you can't marry a white person. If you are feeble-minded, you can't marry at all. We'll get into what feeble-minded means. In the early 1900s, the epileptic hospitals were opening up everywhere. Epilepsy was still seen as literally a devil possessing your body. We didn't know what it was. We didn't know what caused it. Everyone just tried to avoid you like you had leprosy. It was really bad. On deaf people, this is how the eugenics movement felt about deaf people. We expressed fear that if they were left unchecked, the deaf would produce, quote, defective race of human beings, unquote. Yeah. On the Jews. The Jews had positive attributes according to the eugenicists, but hordes of Jews now coming to U.S. were inferior to English and Scandinavians. Quote, recent Hebrew immigrants occupy a position intermediate between the slovenly Serbians and Greeks and the tidy Swedes, Germans, and Bohemians. So the Jews were actually in the middle. They weren't as bad as the Serbs and the Greeks, but they definitely weren't as good as the Scandinavians, Germans, and the English. They're just in the middle. The Second International Eugenics Congress gathered in 1921. Quote from them, the selection, preservation, and multiplication of the best heredity is a patriotic duty of the first importance. Keeping the line going, better, more important than anything else to do in the country. Another quote from eugenicists, what language can express the humiliation we should feel at seeing our race physically, mentally, and morally slowly going to decay? I know, we just can't let these people run amok. That's crazy. We gotta make ourselves perfect. The goal was racial purity. They wanted the pure white race. Sound familiar? The Nazis basically just adopted eugenics and, as the definition said, made it perverted, made it even worse. So, in 1925, Hitler's masterpiece Mein Kampf is published. In it, Hitler praises U.S. immigration policies by, quote, simply excluding certain races from naturalization, unquote. So if you don't know, in 1924, the U.S. passed this new law that limited certain groups from coming through Ellis Island and Angel Island as much as they had before. The Jews were one of the worst affected. We went from having this many Jews come in to this many. So that's what he's talking about. In 1933, Nazi Germany passes, this is what it's called, Law for the Prevention of Hereditarily Diseased Offspring. Yeah, so what the U.S. was doing, the Nazis just started doing. We all have the same ideas. Why not just make it universal? One law in the U.S. stated epileptic, imbecile, and feeble-minded women were not allowed to marry until the age of 45. basically the age when they could no longer have children. You can't get married at all. Sorry. Sucks for you. In the mid-1930s, 41 states had similar marriage laws on their books. There were only 48 states at the time. 7 states said, you know, that's kind of like infringing on our personal rights. The other 41 were like, you know, we gotta meddle in our citizens' lives. Just that much more. A quote from another eugenicist. We prolong the lives of weaklings and make it possible for them to transmit their characteristics to future generations. That was his reasoning for sterilizing people and stopping them from getting married. If you think this is bad, we're just getting into it. Women were very active in the eugenics movement, oddly enough. This was the only political platform they had a voice in, because before, 1921, of course, before 1921 they couldn't vote. So eugenics was the one place where they could speak their mind. Every state in the Deep South played decisive roles in establishing eugenically segregated institutions for the mentally retarded. Now, the North started this, the South just started doing this later on. It was the North's idea that the South adopted. Dr. Betania Owens Adair, number 440 on the list. She was one of many pushing for eugenics. I'll put a short biography down below. She did a lot of good things, but a lot of bad too. Isabel Barrows was an advocate for the mentally ill. She said we needed laws that would, quote, as far as possible, prevent the birth and reproduction of these imperfect creatures, unquote. Advocate for the mentally ill. We gotta stop them from being born. That was how she did it. Josephine Lowell was the co-founder of New York's Asylum for Feeble-Minded Women in 1878. She said, quote, promiscuous and criminalistic women carried a deadly poison society put at risk when men and women who are diseased and vicious to reproduce their kind. Again, another advocate for the mentally ill, guys. She was just so great, so great. Another prominent eugenicist said, African Negroes are half-witted men and Jews are specialized for a parasitic existence. 10 out of 10, guys, 10 out of 10. Southern eugenicists focused primarily on preserving the pure white line. Have you ever heard of the phrase pure white trash or just white trash? That's actually a eugenist statement. The white people in the South were targeted more than anyone else because only the best of the best could survive. If you were if you were poor, if you weren't as smart, if you were slower, if you weren't... Okay, so like today, white people, like Greek people are white people, Italian people are white people. Back then, no. Whites were Scandinavians and English. The Irish and the Scotsmans weren't even really treated as white. So back then, you had to be a specific white person, otherwise you were a target. A lot of people don't remember that either. So that's what the Southerners were doing. They were going after the poor white trash. So, again, no Jews, no Africans, no Asians, no Arabs, no Islanders, no Mediterraneans, no Scotsmen, no Irish, no Latinos, no South Americans. No. If you weren't from a Nordic or Aryan race, if you weren't English, you weren't good enough. Sorry, you're not good enough for us. No. So the Racial Integrity Act of 1924 basically said you could have one Jewish grandfather 8 generations back. Sorry, you're not pure enough. You're eligible for sterilization. We're gonna get rid of you. So this is where we get into the worst part of this. Yeah, that was just the top layer. This is when we get into the really scary part. Sterilizations. Now, sterilization means we're going to prevent you from having kids. If you already had them, you can't have any more. If you haven't had them, you won't have them at all. So, the first such U.S. law allowing sterilizations passed in 1912 by Washington State. A Virginia law targeted the following. Let me list it for you. Hereditary forms of insanity, feeble-mindedness, epilepsy, imbecility, idiocy, blind and sight-impaired folk, deaf and hearing-impaired folk, deformed and crippled folk, criminalistics including waywards and delinquent folk, diseased, aka if you have syphilis, if you have TB, if you have leprosy, if you have any communicable diseases like STDs, if you are legally segregable, you counted, we're up to 10. Inebriated people, dependents, like if you're an orphan, if you're homeless, if you're a tramp, 12 different types of people. Luckily, the only people out of those 12 groups who could actually be sterilized had to be an inmate of one of the 5 state mental asylums. So they couldn't grab you off the street and sterilize you, but it was very easy for you to get locked up in these 5 places. So if you're in there, chances are you're coming out and you're not going to have kids. So that became law in March of 1924 with a 75-4-2 against vote in Virginia. This is a poem written by a eugenicist. Quote, "O you wise men, take up the burden and make this your loudest creed. Sterilize the misfits promptly, all not fit to breed." End quote. Yay! In 1927, approximately 53% of sterilized patients were men. 5 years later, in 1932, it had switched. 67% women were sterilized. Quote, "Men on Tuesdays, women on Thursdays," unquote. Quote, "It was as routine as taking out tonsils," unquote. Quotes from someone who used to work in one of the hospitals. First, involuntary castration was used on men. And then after that, the vasectomy was invented by the eugenicists so they wouldn't have to actually castrate the men. So if you don't know, castration basically makes it so you can't have any fun or anything forever. You're just done. Vasectomy makes it so you can't have kids, but you can still have fun. So, like I said, the vasectomy was invented by the eugenicists. That was for men. For women, there were hysterectomies, and before the hysterectomy was the salpingectomy. So those were both used on women. Did some stuff up in there. You can't have babies anymore. Sorry. Just gone. In the 1890s, the head of the Kansas State Asylum for idiotic and imbecile youth castrated 44 boys and men and gave hysterectomies to 14 girls and women in the 1890s. That was before this really took off and got, everyone started getting in on it. In 1905, American Institutions for the Feeble-Minded made sure said sterilizations would save the U.S. from, quote, the slough of degeneration. All my Nazi fanatics out there, degenerate art is what the Nazis were trying to get rid of. So again, taken from us good old Americans. Yay! Okay. The surgeon at the Indiana Reformatory in 1909 revealed 42 male inmates under the age of 26 were sterilized in every, quote, almshouse, insane asylum, institute for the feeble-minded, reformatory, or prison, unquote. Everyone should be sterilized. We ain't gonna have no babies no more. Yeah, so if you were in prison at the time, it was very likely that you would be sterilized for absolutely no reason. Like, you stole $1 from someone, no more kids. Can you imagine if they did that to people today? It's a scary thought, but I bet crime rate would go in some areas. Just saying. Iowa allowed sterilizations of any of the following: criminals, rapists, idiots, feeble-minded, imbeciles, lunatics, drunkards, drug fiends, epileptics, syphilitics, moral and sexual perverts, and diseased and degenerate persons. Again, 13 types of people. By the 1920s, 12 or more U.S. states had sterilization laws on their books. This is where we get into Carrie Buck. Carrie Buck was famous for the Supreme Court case Buck versus Bell. She is number 336 on my list. The case was taken to the Supreme Court on whether or not she should be sterilized. The whole reason it was taken there was to pave the way for everyone else's sterilization in Virginia. It had nothing to do with what Carrie actually thought. She had no idea what was going on. She had gone to the 6th grade, and then her foster parents had pulled her from school. So she was educated, but not really enough to know what was happening to her. Anyway, the case ended up not in her favor. She ended up being sterilized. 2 of the Supreme Court justices over her case were Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., very famous, and former President William Howard Taft, also very famous. When Holmes died, the New York Times had him on the front page, and I thought this was interesting just for you guys to know. They called him Chief Liberal. It was like 2 days before his 94th birthday when he died or something. But yeah, I'm just trying to tell you guys right now that you need to stop blaming Republicans for everything if you're a liberal. And if you're a Republican, stop blaming liberals for anything. They both have really dark pasts. As I said last week with the founding of the Republican Party with Lincoln, this week I'm showing you the bad side of liberals. Anyway, PSA over. Back to the story. Doris Buck was Carrie's half-sister. She's number 443. Carrie, her mother, and her half-sister, and her daughter even, were all considered feeble-minded and epileptic, even though none of them had epilepsy, and all of them were very intelligent to the degree of education that they had received. Carrie and Doris were both given salpingectomies. That's where they cut off a part of your fallopian tubes to prevent you from the eggs from doing the stuff. And I'm not an anatomy teacher, you know what I mean. So they were both given salpingectomies in 1927 and 28. They were told they were getting appendectomies, basically like they had appendicitis and their appendix was removed. That's what they were told happened to them. This is a quote from Carrie herself. Quote, "I didn't want a big family, just a couple children. Oh yeah, I was angry. They done me wrong. They done us all wrong." Unquote. Their mom died in the colony, which is what the mental hospital was called, after living there 24 years. Carrie's daughter, who was a product of rape, she was raped by her foster parents' nephew. Vivian died when she was 8 of a lung infection, something like that. Another famous woman who was involved in all this, Willie Mallory was her name, number 441. She was sterilized with her oldest daughter. Willie was 38, the mother of 9 children. They just wanted to stop her, of course, like everyone else. She ended up going to court and she sued the doctors, saying they had no right to sterilize her. They had abused her. They had done all these horrible things. And she lost, of course, because the courts all wanted people sterilized. The point is, because of Willie, doctors make sure to get written consent from their patients now because of her, because they don't want to get sued. Malpractice courts, just a bad deal. So you can thank Willie for whenever they get your consent. In 1950, the U.S. sterilized 1,526 people. In 1974, Virginia repeals their 1924 law, therefore making sterilizations not necessary unless you actually wanted or needed one for an actual medical reason. In 1983, Oregon became the last state to repeal their law. 1983. So if a 20-year-old was sterilized then, they'd be 53 now. They could still be alive. These people are still alive, and you never learned this. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It's not fair. 60 to 70,000 people were sterilized in the U.S. in approximately 50 years. 60 to 70,000, okay? Get that through your heads. You need to know this. You need to take it to your schools. You need to shout it at everyone on the blocks. You need to know this. This is our country's real history, and they're lying to you, and they don't want you to know it. Next week, I am going to be talking about how the Third Reich, the Nazis, followed the paths of Lincoln and Sanger. Last week and this week all come together next week. If you thought this was bad, honey, we're just getting started. I'm Alex. Thanks again. Make sure to subscribe, comment below any questions you have. If you're as outraged as I am, let me know it. Share the video everywhere you can. I want everyone to know this, and I want everyone to be just as angry as me. Okay? Okay, thanks everyone. I'll see you next week. Bye.